Difficult really to explain what it is to be together as a family for the first time. Just wonderful.
In the world of British royalty, where emotion is often hidden behind poise and duty, one quiet royal has always stood apart: Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex. Known for his calm presence and unwavering loyalty to the crown, Edward has spent decades living in the shadow of his more public siblings. But recently, something changed. Behind the palace gates, a heartbreaking moment unfolded, one that left even the most composed royal unable to hold back his emotions. Cameras what words could not express. A man overcome with grief, his eyes filled with tears he could no longer conceal. What happened to Prince Edward that broke the silence he's kept for so long? In this video, we uncover the emotional truth behind that unforgettable moment, exploring the hidden pain, the family tensions, and the quiet strength that defines the royal who rarely lets the world see him cry. A quiet man in the royal spotlight. Among the grand portraits and polished halls of Buckingham Palace, one royal figure has always chosen the shadows over the spotlight. Prince Edward, the youngest son of the late Queen Elizabeth II, and Prince Philip, has lived a life marked by quiet dignity. While his siblings often found themselves in the glare of public scrutiny, Edward carved a different path, one defined not by controversy or glamour, but by quiet commitment and loyalty. From an early age, Edward seemed different from the rest. He lacked the bold confidence of Prince Charles, the spirited independence of Princess Anne, and the headline-making impulsiveness of Prince Andrew. He was the thoughtful one, often seen standing just behind his parents during public appearances, observing rather than performing. His gentle nature made him a favorite of the Queen, who saw in him a steady hand and a calm heart. Yet, that same gentleness often made him invisible to the world. After finishing his education at Gordonstown, the same school his father once attended, Edward briefly tried to forge a career in the entertainment industry, a rare move for a royal at the time. He worked behind the scenes in television production, determined to prove himself beyond his royal title. It was a bold attempt to step out from behind palace walls, but the public and the press were unkind. When one of his early projects failed to gain traction, critics mocked him mercilessly, and Edward retreated once again to the familiar comfort of royal duties. It was there he found both purpose and peace. He devoted himself to causes that rarely made headlines but deeply mattered to him: youth development, sports, and the arts. Over the years, Edward became the quiet backbone of the monarchy's charitable work. He preferred the steady rhythm of responsibility to the chaos of royal drama. He and his wife, Sophie, Countess of Wessex, became the embodiment of modern royal duty: reliable, compassionate, and scandal-free. Together, they raised their children away from the suffocating glare of royal fame, choosing Windsor over London, privacy over publicity. Yet, even as the world overlooked him, the late Queen never did. She trusted Edward deeply, relying on him to handle delicate royal affairs without fuss or complaint. Behind closed doors, he was the calm voice in moments of tension, the one who always sought balance and understanding when the royal family faced storms. But despite his quiet strength, life within the royal institution comes with its share of unseen burdens. For years, Edward carried those burdens silently, never allowing the public to glimpse the weight he bore. To many, he appeared unshakable until recently. Something had changed in the man once described as the most composed of the Queen's children. The cameras caught a flicker of pain, a moment of deep emotion that could no longer be concealed. It was a reminder that even the quietest royal has a breaking point, and for Prince Edward, that moment was heartbreakingly near: the unexpected call. It was a cold morning in Windsor, the kind that seemed to carry silence in the air. Prince Edward had just returned from a brief engagement, his usual calmness reflected in every movement. The Countess of Wessex was in the sitting room, reading through correspondence, while the faint sound of church bells echoed in the distance. Everything appeared peaceful, almost ordinary, until the phone rang. The sound was sharp, sudden, and unsettling. Edward paused, a trace of unease crossing his face. Over the years, he had received countless calls, most routine, a few unpleasant, but this one felt different. The tone in the aide's voice on the other end was strained, careful, almost trembling. Within seconds, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Sophie looked up, sensing immediately that something was wrong. Edward's usual composure faltered as he listened. The words came slowly, each one heavier than the last. He did not speak, only nodded faintly, his grip on the phone tightening as his eyes clouded with disbelief. When the call ended, he remained still, frozen in place, his expression unreadable. Sophie approached quietly, asking what had happened, but for a moment he could not respond. It was as if the air had been pulled from the room. Eventually, he whispered a few words and Sophie's face paled. The news was personal, devastating, and completely unexpected. Within the walls of the palace, news travels fast, but emotion travels faster. Within an hour, aides were seen moving briskly through the corridors. Whispered conversations echoed behind closed doors. Something was unfolding, something that even the most seasoned palace staff could not easily contain. For Edward, the weight of the call lingered like a shadow. The man known for his restraint could no longer hide the storm brewing inside him. His eyes, often calm and observant, were now clouded with grief. He excused himself from the room, stepping out into the cold air, walking through the quiet gardens that had always brought him comfort. The breeze was biting, yet he hardly felt it. The call had not only brought bad news, it had reopened wounds that never fully healed. Since the passing of the late Queen, Edward had tried to keep the family united, maintaining dignity amidst the shifting balance of royal life. But this sudden loss struck at the fragile core he had been trying so hard to protect. As he stood beneath the bare branches, the memories came rushing back. The laughter of childhood, the comforting voice of his mother, the strength of his father, the closeness of family that once felt unbreakable. Now, it all seemed so distant. The palace clock struck 11, each chime echoing through the cold morning air. At that moment, Prince Edward knew that nothing would be the same again. The unexpected call had not just delivered heartbreaking news, it had changed something deep within him, something that could not easily be repaired, a family already under strain. In the days that followed the call, the stillness inside Windsor Castle was heavy, almost suffocating. Prince Edward went about his duties with his usual discipline, but those closest to him noticed the difference. His eyes seemed dimmer, his steps slower, his silences longer. Something within him had changed. Yet even before the devastating news arrived, the royal family had been quietly weathering a storm of its own. Since the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the monarchy had entered a fragile new era. King Charles, now carrying the immense weight of the crown, was determined to modernize the institution. His reign, though stable on the surface, had stirred unseen ripples within the family. Old wounds had resurfaced, and private disagreements over royal roles, titles, and traditions had quietly tested their unity. Prince Edward, ever the peacekeeper, often found himself caught in the middle. He understood his elder brother's sense of duty, but also sympathized with those who felt left behind by the shifting royal structure. His sister, Princess Anne, with her no-nonsense approach, urged the family to focus on service above emotion. Prince Andrew, once a central figure, now lived under a cloud of controversy, his royal duties stripped, his presence a source of discomfort. Amid all of this, Edward stood as the quiet bridge between them all, the one who never sought attention but always sought understanding. For years, Edward had been the dependable one, the steady hand that quietly supported his mother's vision. He took pride in that role, not because it brought him recognition, but because it gave him purpose. But after her passing, that sense of purpose began to blur. Without her guiding presence, the royal family's inner circle felt incomplete, its foundation shaken. The Queen had been the glue that held them together, the calm voice that diffused tension, the gentle reminder of what family truly meant. Without her, cracks began to appear. During family gatherings, the warmth that once filled the room was replaced by polite formality. The laughter was shorter, the conversations carefully measured. Edward felt it deeply, more than he admitted. He missed the days when his mother's smile could ease any argument, when his father's commanding presence could restore order with a single glance. Now, those days were gone, and Edward could feel the burden of keeping peace resting heavily on his shoulders. Sophie tried to comfort him, reminding him that families change, that grief takes its toll in different ways. But Edward was not just grieving his mother. He was mourning the slow unraveling of the closeness they once shared as siblings. He often found himself staring out the window of his study late at night, watching the faint lights of Windsor flicker in the distance, thinking of what his mother would have wanted him to do. Yet, despite the emotional distance among the royals, he remained loyal, showing up to every engagement, smiling when expected, standing tall beside his brother the king. Still, deep down, he knew the family was not the same. The call he had received only deepened the fracture, adding another layer of pain to a heart already burdened. For Edward, the challenge was no longer about royal duty or public image. It was about holding together a family that seemed to be quietly slipping apart. Memories of the Queen. The corridors of Windsor still carried the faint scent of her perfume, the delicate trace of the late Queen's presence lingering in every room. For Prince Edward, walking through the palace often felt like stepping into a memory. Every corner whispered reminders of her, the soft laughter during family teas, the firm yet gentle voice that had guided him through life's most difficult choices. She had been more than a monarch to him. She had been his mother, his confidant, his moral compass. In the quiet hours of dawn, Edward often found himself sitting alone in the small study that had once been hers. The room remained untouched since her passing. The books on her desk were still neatly arranged, her reading glasses resting beside an unfinished letter, and the framed photographs of her children and grandchildren stood exactly as she had left them. He would sit there for hours, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking softly as if she were still there. His bond with his mother had always been special, though rarely spoken about in public. Unlike his older siblings, who often bore the brunt of royal expectation, Edward had been her gentle child, the one she never worried about. As a boy, he was quiet and observant, happiest when reading or spending time by her side during her quieter moments at Balmoral. She would often tell him stories about her childhood, about the world before duty consumed her life, and he would listen intently, storing every word like a treasure. Those memories had shaped him, teaching him kindness in a world that often demanded composure. He could still recall the warmth of her hand when she comforted him after his first public embarrassment, her words steady and calm. "Never let them see your spirit break," she had told him, "but never lose your heart either." Those words echoed now, more than ever. Since her passing, Edward had tried to live by them, maintaining the balance between duty and emotion, between silence and strength. Yet grief has a way of seeping through even the strongest resolve. Sometimes, in the middle of official meetings, his mind would drift to images of her, the way she smiled during Christmas gatherings, the way her eyes softened whenever she looked at her grandchildren. Those moments were small, yet they held more meaning than any title or ceremony. The public had seen the Queen as an icon, a symbol of continuity and grace. But Edward had seen the mother who cared deeply, who loved fiercely behind closed doors. Her absence left an emptiness that even time could not fill. Each time he saw her portrait hanging in the grand hallway, his chest tightened, not just with sorrow, but with gratitude. She had taught him everything: restraint, compassion, humility. Now, in her absence, he felt both proud and lost. The palace felt colder without her laughter, the family more distant without her guiding hand. In the stillness of night, when the world outside the castle walls slept, Prince Edward would close his eyes and hear her voice once more calm, loving, and reassuring. And though she was gone, her presence lingered in his heart, a constant reminder of the love and legacy that no crown or title could ever replace. The breaking point. The day began like any other, quiet and composed, yet beneath that calm exterior, something within Prince Edward was slowly unraveling. The news from the phone call days earlier had not faded from his thoughts. It lingered like a shadow, consuming every quiet moment. The passing of a close family friend, a man who had served the royal household for decades, had struck him harder than anyone realized. This was not merely a member of staff. He had been there since Edward's childhood, a steady presence through the most private moments of royal life. To lose him so suddenly felt like losing another piece of the past, another reminder of the years and faces that time was steadily taking away. Edward had always prided himself on composure. His upbringing demanded it. But grief does not recognize royal protocol, and sorrow has a way of breaking through even the thickest walls of formality. During a small engagement at a local charity event in Berkshire, Edward stood before a modest crowd, speaking about the importance of resilience and community. His words were carefully chosen, his tone steady, yet those watching closely could see the strain behind his calm expression. As he spoke, his voice wavered ever so slightly, and he paused for a moment longer than usual. The audience, unaware of what he carried inside, interpreted it as a thoughtful pause, but Sophie, standing nearby, knew otherwise. She saw the tremor in his hand as he gripped the podium, the glint of unshed tears in his eyes. After the event, the cameras caught a brief but powerful image of Prince Edward lowering his head, his hand briefly covering his face. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. By evening, photographs had surfaced online with headlines describing an emotional moment from the usually reserved Earl of Wessex. For once, Edward did not care. He had spent a lifetime controlling his emotions, presenting the image of quiet reliability, yet now the loss felt too heavy to disguise. That evening, he returned home to Windsor and sat in the dim glow of the study, the same place where he used to talk with his mother. Sophie entered quietly, placing a cup of tea beside him, but said nothing. They sat in silence, the kind of silence that speaks more than words ever could. Edward finally broke it with a quiet confession. He spoke of how the years had worn him down, how every farewell felt harder than the last, how the palace now felt emptier than ever before. Sophie listened, her eyes filled with empathy. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to cry not the restrained tears of formality, but the deep, aching tears of a man who had lost too much too soon. That night, the walls that had guarded his emotions for decades finally cracked. Prince Edward, the most composed of royals, reached his breaking point, and though the world might have seen a brief, passing moment of weakness, those who truly knew him understood that it was not weakness at all, but the purest form of humanity. Sophie's silent support. In moments when the grandeur of royal life fades into silence, it is often love that holds everything together. For Prince Edward, that love came in the quiet, unwavering form of his wife, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. She had always been his anchor, steady, understanding, and fiercely loyal. While others in the royal family were swept up by the weight of duty and the gaze of the world, Sophie had mastered the delicate balance of compassion and strength. She understood Edward in ways few ever could. When the news of loss broke him, she was there, not with grand gestures or speeches, but with silence, the kind that speaks of deep connection. Sophie knew that Edward's pain ran far deeper than what the public saw. To the outside world, he was the calm and composed youngest son of the late Queen, a man who rarely faltered. But she saw the sleepless nights, the quiet sighs behind closed doors, the way he stared out the window as though searching for something beyond the palace walls. She never pressed him to talk, yet her presence alone was enough to ease his turmoil. Their marriage had always been built on mutual respect rather than spectacle. Unlike the turbulent unions that once plagued the monarchy, Edward and Sophie's partnership grew stronger with each passing year. They shared a love that did not seek attention. Instead, it thrived in their shared values, their laughter over simple family dinners, and the countless moments the cameras never captured. When Edward's grief became too heavy to bear, Sophie guided him gently through it. She reminded him that vulnerability was not a flaw, but a sign of depth, that even royals are human, and that emotions are not weaknesses but proof of love. There were evenings when she would find him sitting alone in his study, his head bowed over old letters or photographs. Without a word, she would place a hand on his shoulder, and he would cover it with his own, their silence saying everything that words could not. Together they would sit there, letting the weight of memories settle before moving forward again. Sophie had faced her share of pain too. She had seen the strain of public life, the scrutiny and the quiet sacrifices that came with being part of the royal family. Yet she never allowed it to harden her. Her warmth and empathy made her not only a devoted wife, but also a cherished confidant for many within the palace. She carried herself with grace, protecting Edward from unnecessary intrusion, ensuring that his private grief remained just that private. In the days following Edward's public moment of emotion, Sophie became his shield. She managed his engagements, deflected the probing questions of the press, and guarded their family's peace. Behind her calm smile was a determination to protect the man she loved from further pain. It was through her quiet strength that Edward began to heal. Together they faced the storms of duty and loss, their bond growing even stronger. And while the world saw only a prince and his countess, behind the palace doors stood two souls bound by something far greater than title or tradition, an enduring love that carried them through their darkest hours. The public sees a different Edward. When Prince Edward reappeared in public after weeks of quiet withdrawal, there was something unmistakably different about him. Gone was the perfectly measured composure that had long defined his royal image. In its place stood a man whose grief had softened the edges of his restraint. His first engagement was a remembrance service in London, a formal occasion honoring those who had dedicated their lives to royal service. It was a setting he had attended countless times before, yet this one felt painfully personal. As he stepped out of the car, cameras flashed in rapid bursts. The crowd gathered outside St. George's Chapel was respectful, subdued, but the moment Edward walked up the steps, the world seemed to pause. His face carried traces of sleepless nights, and though he smiled politely, his eyes betrayed a sorrow too deep to conceal. The ceremony was solemn, filled with hymns and prayers that echoed through the ancient chapel. Edward sat beside Sophie, his hands clasped tightly, his gaze distant. When the choir began to sing "Abide with Me," a song once beloved by his late mother, his composure began to waver. He took a quiet breath, lowering his head as emotion flickered across his face. Cameras captured the moment, a single tear sliding down his cheek, his lips pressed together as he fought to regain control. It was brief, human, and heartbreakingly real. For the first time, the public saw Prince Edward not as the unshakable royal, but as a grieving son, a man who had endured too much loss in too short a time. Within hours, the images spread across media outlets around the world. Headlines read, "Prince Edward breaks down during service," and "The Earl of Wessex shows rare emotion." Yet instead of criticism or speculation, the response was one of compassion. People were moved by his vulnerability. Messages of support flooded royal correspondence offices. For many, it was a moment that reminded them that behind the grandeur of monarchy lived a family bound by the same emotions that touched every heart. The public, who had often viewed Edward as the quiet and distant royal, now saw him in a new light as a man of deep feeling, humility, and courage. Even those within palace walls sensed the change. Staff members spoke softly of how he now greeted everyone with warmer eyes, how he paused to listen longer, and how the once reserved prince had become more approachable. The grief that once weighed him down had, in some way, opened his heart further. Sophie noticed it too. His laughter, though rarer, was more genuine. His interactions with their children carried a deeper tenderness. When he attended future engagements, people felt drawn to him in a way they had not before. He no longer seemed like the royal who stood in the background, but rather the one who quietly embodied strength through gentleness. That moment in the chapel had altered how the world saw him, but it had also changed how he saw himself. The mask of restraint had slipped, and in its place, a new authenticity emerged. Prince Edward had revealed the side of royalty seldom seen, not the title, not the ceremony, but the beating heart of a man learning to heal in the public eye, a royal trying to heal. The days that followed Prince Edward's emotional public appearance were filled with quiet reflection. Inside Bagshot Park, his private residence with Sophie and their children, the atmosphere was calm yet contemplative. Edward spent more time walking through the gardens, often alone, finding comfort in the stillness of nature. The flowers were beginning to bloom again, and with every new petal he felt a faint reminder that even after the coldest winter, life finds a way to return. He was trying to heal, but healing for a royal is never simple. His life was bound by duty, structure, and expectation. Every appearance, every word spoken in public carried significance. Yet behind the titles and ceremonies, he was just a man learning how to navigate grief without losing himself to it. He began to channel his emotions into his work, finding meaning in service once again. One afternoon, he visited a youth organization he had long supported, one that helps young people develop confidence and leadership skills. As he spoke with the participants, he found a renewed sense of purpose. Their optimism reminded him of his mother's wisdom that hope and service were the greatest forms of healing. It was there, surrounded by laughter and youthful energy, that he felt a flicker of peace for the first time in months. Sophie noticed the change in him. Though the sadness still lingered in his eyes, there was a quiet strength returning to his voice. She watched as he began to speak more openly about the importance of mental well-being, a topic rarely addressed so candidly by senior royals. He spoke of the challenges of coping with loss, of finding resilience in faith, family, and purpose. His words resonated deeply with the public. People began to see him not just as a symbol of the monarchy, but as a relatable figure, someone who had known pain and found the courage to keep moving forward. Within the family, Edward's calm nature once again became a steadying influence. His relationship with King Charles grew stronger, built on mutual respect and understanding. The two brothers often met privately, sharing memories of their mother and discussing the future of the monarchy. Anne admired his quiet determination, while even Andrew, now living a more secluded life, reached out to him for advice. Edward did not seek to lead, but his actions began to speak louder than any title could. Despite the emotional toll, he refused to retreat from public life. He continued attending engagements with renewed sincerity, offering comfort to others facing hardship. His empathy, shaped by his own experience, gave him a deeper connection to the people he met. It was not grand speeches or lavish ceremonies that defined his recovery, but the simple acts of kindness that followed. Each handshake, each gentle smile became part of his healing journey. At night, he would often sit by the window beside Sophie, watching the soft lights of Windsor in the distance. He no longer sought to hide his pain. Instead, he allowed it to exist as part of him, a reminder of love, loss, and endurance. Prince Edward was still grieving, but now he was learning something profound, that strength does not come from never breaking, but from finding the courage to rebuild after the pieces have fallen apart. Strength through the tears. Spring had returned to Windsor, and with it came a quiet sense of renewal. The gardens around the castle were alive again, filled with the soft hum of bees and the scent of blooming roses. Prince Edward walked slowly along the familiar paths, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It had been many months since that emotional moment when the world had seen him cry, yet the echoes of it still lingered. In those months, something within him had changed forever. He was no longer the man who hid his pain behind royal composure. He had learned that vulnerability, once feared, could be a kind of strength. The loss he had endured had stripped away the layers of formality that so often surrounded royal life. What remained was a man who understood, perhaps more than ever, the value of compassion. As he continued his royal duties, people began to notice a new warmth in him. When he visited hospitals, he took extra time to speak with the families waiting in quiet worry. When he met volunteers, he listened with genuine interest, his attention unwavering. Those who met him described him not as distant, but deeply human. His smile, though gentle, carried a depth that only comes from someone who has known sorrow and chosen to keep going. Sophie often said that her husband had found his true self through grief. He had always been kind and considerate, but now there was a gravity in his kindness, a sincerity that touched those around him. Together, they became symbols of stability and quiet grace, offering a different kind of strength to a royal family still adjusting to a new era. Even the king noticed it. During one family gathering at Balmoral, Charles had placed a hand on Edward's shoulder and simply said, "You've carried us all in ways you may never realize." It was a rare moment of open emotion between brothers who had learned to live under the weight of royal restraint. For Edward, it meant more than words could express. The public, too, responded with affection. Letters arrived daily from people thanking him for showing that even a prince could feel pain and still stand tall. His openness reminded many that the monarchy, though steeped in tradition, could still reflect the humanity of those it represents. Yet through it all, Edward never sought attention or praise. He returned to his quiet routines, his work and his family, finding solace in the ordinary. Some evenings he would walk through the gardens with Sophie, their conversation light, their hearts content in the simplicity of the moment. The pain had not vanished, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, it had become a part of his strength, a reminder of love endured and lessons learned. As the sun set over Windsor, its golden light spilling across the castle walls, Edward paused and looked toward the sky. He thought of his mother, of her voice, her wisdom, her grace. He knew she would have been proud not because of his title or his composure, but because he had chosen to face pain with courage and to turn his grief into purpose. In that moment, surrounded by the stillness of evening, Prince Edward felt a quiet peace. He had walked through sorrow and found resilience. His tears had not weakened him. They had set him free. In the end, Prince Edward's journey became a quiet testament to strength through sorrow. His heartbreak revealed the depth of his humanity, reminding the world that even those born into crowns and titles carry the same emotions we all share. Through grief, he found grace. Through loss, he discovered purpose. His vulnerability touched hearts far beyond palace walls, showing that dignity and compassion can coexist. Today, Prince Edward stands not just as a royal, but as a man whose courage to feel has inspired millions, proving that sometimes the greatest strength is found in the softest of tears.